Domain expansion, the most powerful technique within Jujutsu Kaisen's power system. We've been introduced to domains since the beginning of the story, but it still might not be that straightforward to understand how they actually work. Today I will explain in detail what domain expansion is, what are the drawbacks of casting a domain, how to counter it, and each character's domain expansion we've seen so far in the series. Domain expansion is an advanced barrier technique and is considered as the pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery. It constructs the user's innate domain inside a barrier infused with their innate curse technique. Within a domain expansion, the user's curse techniques are improved, and any that are activated are guaranteed to hit. A specific hand sign or signal unique to the user is required to expand someone's respective domain. Before we talk about each character's domain expansion, there are two main types of domains in general: lethal and non-lethal. Domains that are expanded to be lethal are constructed within a barrier imbued with the user's curse technique. In lethal domains, the user's abilities are amplified, and any curse techniques deployed within the domain are guaranteed to hit their target. This is often called the can't-miss effect or sure-hit effect. This sure-hit factor is derived from the barrier's embedded technique, which is what makes this type of domain considered lethal. Lethal domain expansions require the user to be able to erect their own barrier and infuse it with their curse technique in a timely fashion as well. Megumi Fushiguro, for example, cannot expand a completed lethal domain because he struggles to create an independent space using a barrier. That's why Megumi's domain doesn't have a guaranteed hit. Only Sukuna and Kenjaku possess the ability to expand a lethal domain without enclosing their barrier. Their barriers possess no outer shell, yet still retain sure-hit attacks. The second type of domains are non-lethal domains. In the past, domain expansion was a more common technique because domains weren't constructed to be fatal. They only forced targets inside to obey the rules of the embedded curse technique. As more domains were constructed to be lethal, the number of users greatly decreased over time. It's also worth mentioning that there is also incomplete domains, which happens when a domain is expanded using only cursed energy without an embedded curse technique, even if they include a barrier. Now, what are the drawbacks of casting a domain expansion? While domain expansion provides a great advantage to the user, it comes at the cost of an immense amount of cursed energy. Casting domain expansion will cause the user's curse technique to become unstable for a short time afterward, and attempting to use curse techniques during this period will cause them to burn out and fail to activate. The only two individuals who can cast their domain multiple times a day are Satoru Gojo and Ryomen Sukuna. Kinji Hakari can also achieve this feat, but only if he can hit the jackpot inside his domain. We will explain this in detail later in this video. And now that we know what domain expansion is, we should talk about the countermeasures of this advanced technique. So far in the series, we've seen 4 ways to counter domain expansion. The first way is anti-domain techniques. And there are 4 types of anti-domain techniques. The first one is called simple domain. Because not everyone can use domain expansion, a Heian-era sorcerer, Sadatsuna Ashiya, created the simple domain, or domain for the weak, during the golden age of Jujutsu in order to protect his followers from evil curses and curse users. Simple domain erects a small barrier around the user to protect them from the effects of a domain expansion. It neutralizes a domain's guaranteed hit function by affecting its barrier and not the imbued curse technique. However, against a proper domain expansion, simple domain can only hope to buy its user time, as powerful domains can destroy simple domains within seconds. The second anti-domain technique is called Hollow Wicker Basket, which is the predecessor to simple domain. It neutralizes a domain's barrier imbued with a curse technique to nullify its guaranteed hit. However, it cannot neutralize curse techniques themselves, making it ineffective against incomplete or non-lethal domains. Hollow Wicker Basket's main difference with simple domain is that it's primarily used for countering domain expansions only, while simple domain can also be used outside a domain in conjunction with swordsmanship for attacking purposes. The third anti-domain technique is called Falling Blossom Emotion, which is a secret art passed down in the big 3 sorcerer families. Unlike simple domain, in which the user manifests their own domain to nullify a domain expansion's auto-hit attack, Falling Blossom Emotion shrouds the user in cursed energy that counterattacks the moment a domain's guaranteed hit makes contact. The cursed energy defends the user automatically, countering any attack with equal force to nullify it. However, the move doesn't protect against physical attacks. As we saw in the Shibuya incident, Dagon was still able to punch Naoya despite the latter's use of the technique. The last anti-domain technique is domain amplification. In this technique, the user expands their domain thinly over their entire body like a cloak. While domain amplification is active, the user can neutralize the sure-hit effects of any domain expansion. The technique will also neutralize the curse technique of anyone touched by the user. However, its primary drawback is that the user's innate curse technique cannot be activated at the same time, which limits the user to rely on hand-to-hand combat. The second way to counter a domain expansion is to make a hole hole in the domain's barrier and penetrate it from the outside. The barrier of a domain is reinforced from inside to prevent the target from escaping, but this comes with a price. The more a barrier is reinforced from the inside, the easier it is to break from the outside. This ability is not widely used, as breaking in would also make the attacker a target for the sure hit effect of the domain. The third way to counter a domain expansion is by breaking out of it when the person is inside a domain. Much like infiltration, the attacker breaks the barrier of the domain by creating a hole, but this time to escape from the domain and get out of it. This technique is not very reliable, as it's usually impossible to do it, especially against stronger opponents, and it pushes the user to their limit as it takes a lot of cursed energy to perform it. The last and the best countermeasure against domain expansion is to expand one's own domain, and this is called domain clash. In the clash of domains, the more refined domain takes over and will dominate the other domain. The time it takes for one domain to dominate in a clash varies on that difference in refinement. For example, Gojo's superior domain immediately dominated Jogo's, while Dagon's domain took much more time to subdue Megumi's. And it's also worth mentioning that in the case of overlapping domains, sure hit effects cancel each other out. When two domains are completely even and the users fight with their domains open, the moment one combatant takes heavy damage or their domain collapses, the other's can't miss attack will strike immediately. With all that out of the way, let's talk about each character's domain expansion in Jujutsu Kaisen. We'll start with Mahito's domain expansion, self-embodiment of perfection. Mahito's domain expansion is conjured by hand seals formed by tiny hands inside his mouth. This creates a large black environment that presents Mahito's target with giant hands clasped together to form a flower-like shape. Self-embodiment of perfection increases the effectiveness of Mahito's idle transfiguration cursed technique by guaranteeing it hits the soul of the target every time. Nanami described the experience of being inside Mahito's domain as akin to literally being in the palm of his hand. Alongside Gojo's unlimited void, self-embodiment of perfection is an almost guaranteed victory for the caster, according to Nanami. However, a major drawback of this ability is that Mahito is forced to touch the soul of anyone inside, as this backfired when Yuji entered the domain from the outside, causing Mahito to unintentionally touch Sukuna's soul for the second time, prompting the King of Curses to lash out at Mahito. Next, we have Jogo's Coffin of the Iron Mountain. The environment constructed by this domain resembles the inside of an active volcano. It is a sealed-off stone chamber with large fissures across the walls and the ground that spout large portions of magma. This produces an ambient heat so great that the average Jujutsu sorcerer would combust upon entering the domain. Coffin of the Iron Mountain is a lethal domain that includes a guaranteed hit. Jogo can command molten rock that extends from the environment to hit their opponent with a can't-miss attack. He first displayed his domain expansion when he was desperate to kill Satoru Gojo in their fight. However, Gojo expanded his unlimited void, which proved to be the more polished of the two domains, and quickly suppressed Coffin of the Iron Mountain. And this brings us to the next domain, Gojo's unlimited void. This domain expansion brings Gojo and his targets inside the limitless itself, a vast void of infinite knowledge. Boundless raw information floods into the target's mind, overwhelming them to the point where they're completely immobilized. The complete incapacitation of the target is caused by a phenomenon where the target will be able to see and feel everything while not being able to see or feel anything at the same time. All the actions one has taken in their life is forced upon them infinitely, and they can't do anything but die slowly. Our next domain is Dagon's Horizon of the Captivating Skandha. This domain expansion is conjured when Dagon forms a seal on his stomach. This creates a tropical beach that has a forest of palm trees on one side of the shore and a vast ocean on the other side. For this reason, it is considered as a calm domain, and it is also the most beautiful one. I mean, domains aren't really supposed to be beautiful, but come on guys, tell me this doesn't straight up look like Hawaii. Of course, that's until you get attacked by man-eating fish, as this domain has a sure hit technique called the Death Swarm that allows the fish Shikigami Dagon creates to automatically hit their target. From the view of the target, the fish appear suddenly, making them almost impossible to block, as the Shikigami don't exist until they hit the target and instantly devouring the target's flesh. Next, we have Megumi Fushigro's domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. While still incomplete, Chimera Shadow Garden floods the area with thick fluid shadows from the 10 Shadows technique. This grants the user the ability to manifest multiple Shikigami, as well as advanced manipulation of all available shadows. The floor of flooded shadows can quickly reshape itself into black toads that can grab onto Fushigro's target. Anyone standing in the shadow will have to reinforce their feet with cursed energy or risk falling into the abyss. Within the liquid-like shadows, there is no buoyancy, resistance, or oxygen. Anyone who drops into it will fall indefinitely. Next, we have the deadly sentencing of Higuruma. It's a non-lethal domain which reflects a small courtroom where Higuruma plays the role of the prosecutor and his target plays the role of the defendant. Because it's a non-lethal domain, it doesn't contain domain can't miss attacks. Instead, it forces those inside to follow the rules of Higuruma's cursed technique. And unlike other domains, there is no violence allowed inside the domain for either side. The trial-based cursed technique imbued into the domain allows the user to prosecute their target with the Shikigami called Judgment. Judgment knows everything about everyone inside the domain, but this information isn't shared with either side. I mean, the thing is called Judgment for a reason. In this domain, first Judgment will announce the charges against the defendant, which are actual crimes they may or may not have committed. After the accusation is reviewed, the defendant is given one chance to defend their case. They have three options: stay silent, confession, or denial. If the defendant chooses to deny the charges, they can lie in their statements. The defendant's goal is to dispel all doubt and win a pronouncement of innocence from Judgment. Higuruma also has one chance to make a statement, and he can rebuttal the defendant's statement. The rebuttal is based on evidence submitted by Judgment. The evidence is not necessarily conclusive, and it will not be opened and shared with the defendant until after their statement. Once both sides have made their statements, Judgment will deliver a lawful verdict. If the defendant is found guilty, they are punished with one of what is implied to be several different sentences. Not even Higuruma can be sure of which sentence their opponent will receive, but in most cases, the defendant will be punished in accordance with the harshness of their crime. So far, we have seen two possible punishments. The first one is confiscation, which temporarily prevents the defendant from using cursed techniques. If the defendant has no cursed technique, the effect switches to preventing the use of cursed energy. The other punishment is confiscation plus death penalty, which is the most severe sentence Judgment can give. This enacts the effects of confiscation and grants the prosecutor the executioner's sword, which can kill targets in a single blow. It is also worth mentioning that the defendant can request a retrial that Judgment cannot deny, but this can only happen if the defendant is found guilty without an open confession. Next, we have Kenjaku's domain expansion, womb profusion. As we mentioned earlier, Kenjaku's domain expansion is one of the only two lethal domains without an enclosed barrier. Kenjaku's domain erects a tower made of these ugly, distorted-face cursed spirits. The faces of the cursed spirits let out powerful blasts at a certain gesture of Kenjaku's hands. The sure-hit blast of this tower of cursed spirits is so destructive that it can lethally injure the target and throw them off. Even a special-grade Jujutsu sorcerer like Yuki can't match its power, as we saw during her fight against Kenjaku. This domain is extremely refined, as it easily stripped Yuki's simple domain down to nothing, whose sole purpose is to counter the effects of domain expansions, as we mentioned earlier. And next we have the Malevolent Shrine, which belongs to the King of Curses himself, Ryomen Sukuna. Much like Kenjaku's womb profusion, it's a lethal domain without an enclosed barrier. The effective area impact of this domain is 200 meters, which can be narrowed down by Sukuna for more accurate results. Malevolent Shrine's guaranteed hit slashes apart anything until nothing remains aside from Sukuna himself within its effective range. And this is done with two types of slashing attacks, cleave and dismantle. Sukuna can set which of the two attacks to use against specific types of targets, such as using dismantle against things with no cursed energy, and using cleave for subjects with cursed energy. And this can only stop when Sukuna makes the domain disappear, or when Sukuna is so badly injured that he cannot sustain the domain anymore. Our next domain is Naoya's Timecell Moon Palace. Naoya's domain works on the inherited cursed technique of the Zenin clan, which is called projection sorcery. If you're not familiar with the projection sorcery technique, it traces movement of the target at 24 frames per second and traps anyone who disobeys that rule inside a frame for 1 second. The sure hit function of this domain injects films of animation frames into the neck of its targets. Anyone who moves within the domain must abide by the 24 frames per second rule of projection sorcery, or they will receive numerous bloody injuries with every movement. A terrifying feature of this domain is that it attacks each single cell of the target's body, which ultimately causes them to collapse and bleed out, and causes countlessly small cuts and gashes to appear all over the body, completely immobilizing any target. And if the target insists on moving without abiding by the rule, it can cause severe physical injuries and can even cause limbs to be cut off completely. And now it's time for Hakari's Idle Death Gamble, which is by far the most complicated one. I mean, if you thought Hunter x Hunter's Nen chart was hard, God help you with this one, but I'll try to explain it in the simplest way possible so that you can get it easily. The Idle Death Gamble is a non-lethal domain based on a real pachinko machine and its theme song called Private Pure Love Train. Hakari's goal in this domain is to hit the jackpot by lining up 3 of the same symbols decorated with the characters of Private Pure Love Train. You can take a look at the characters and their names, but that's not really that important to understand this domain. Right after the domain is activated, all the rules of the game are transferred to the target's brain thanks to the domain's sure hit effect. This process is harmless, and as a trade-off, the construction and cursed technique infusion of this domain are extremely fast, as it can be activated in less than 0.2 seconds. The game begins in normal mode, where those inside the domain appear on a neutral stage. As the battle begins, Hakari can manifest 3 different types of visual effect indicators in battle: shutter doors, reserve balls, and consecutive effects. Both shutter doors and reserve balls are offensive attacks, but consecutive effects are defensive defensive indicators that redo a sequence to revert damage on Hakari. But that's not the main use of the visual effects, as Hakari generates one or more of these visual effects in order to advance to a Richi scenario, which is where the roll for jackpot actually happens. The reverse balls and the doors come in 3 different colors that indicate the likeliness of a jackpot. Green has lowest likeliness, while gold has the highest, and red is right in the middle of the other two. There are also rainbow-colored balls or doors that guarantee a jackpot. As for the consecutive effects, the likeliness of a jackpot is indicated by times 1, 2, and 3 multipliers. There is also times 4 multiplier, which guarantees a jackpot just like rainbow-colored effects. Hakari can choose which visual effect to manifest, but he can't control which color or multiplier he gets. That's why this whole process depends on luck. Okay, so once Hakari manifests one or more of the visual effects, there are 4 Richi scenarios that the game can advance to. Each of these scenarios has a different chance of hitting a jackpot, and also each of the scenarios changes the stage and uses the characters of Private Pure Love Train in a different way. The first scenario is Transit Card Richi, where if Yuki, who is a character of Private Pure Love Train, passes through the station gate and gets to work on time, Hakari hits the jackpot. This is a low-chance scenario and is likely to fail. The second scenario is Seat Struggle Richi. This Richi has a moderate chance of success, but we have no other information about it as we haven't seen it yet in the series. The third one is Potty Emergency Richi, which also has a moderate chance of success. In this scenario, if Hiro reaches Shin Yurigoka Station without wetting himself, Hakari hits the jackpot. And the last scenario is Friday Night Final Train Richi, where if Yumi doesn't board a train on the opposite platform from Yuki and reappears after it departs, then Hakari hits the jackpot. This Richi has an 80% chance of success, which is the highest among the 4 Richi scenarios. If Hakari doesn't hit the jackpot, another round begins from the starting scene and loops until he hits the jackpot or runs out of chances to win. With every spin that a jackpot is not won, the number of possible spins decreases. Now, what happens if Hakari finally hits the jackpot? Well, the jackpot gives crazy advantages to Hakari. He gains unlimited cursed energy and automatic reversed cursed technique, which prevents his body from retaining damage and makes him effectively unkillable for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which is the duration of the song Admiring You. And this song plays out loud around Hakari. By the end of the song, his cursed energy goes back to normal, and his cursed technique has already been replenished, which allows him to cast his domain repeatedly as long as a jackpot is achieved. The conditions from the previous game do carry over to the next. If Hakari hits the jackpot on odd numbers, the domain will start in advanced probability, rather than the neutral state. If he hits the jackpot on even numbers, he will start on a domain with faster spins. It is worth mentioning that there is also a chance for the domain to start in hidden probability, which has a better chance of hitting the jackpot.
なるほど。わからん。
Anyway, that was the domain expansions we've seen so far in Jujutsu Kaisen, and I know there are some domains I didn't talk about in this video, but that's because either we haven't seen them being used yet, or we don't know much about them. Click here to see 38 amazing small details about Jujutsu Kaisen.